Typically, we think that who we fall in love with is completely defined by big romantic gestures and finding our soulmate. That's why I spend so many nights watching The Notebook. It's so beautiful and so sad. But historically, the selection of romantic partners has often been restricted by social values and prejudice. Movies, family members, schools, and other institutions all give us messages about who we should or shouldn't date. For example, we learn things like being skinny is sexy, or being rich is desired. These messages, while also influencing how we think about ourselves, also start to inform what we look for in a partner. We start to build an internalized sense that someone who looks over a certain weight, or who has too little money, or is a different skin color, or who isn't Ryan Gosling may be less acceptable dating partners than others. Okay, that last one is mostly mine, but still. Some people are more influenced by specific societal messages than others, but all of us are influenced in some way or another. So, if we accept that social values can have an influence on who we want to date, what might that mean for transgender people? Cisgenderism, or cissexism, refers to seeing cisgender, or otherwise known as non-transgender, identities as natural and normal, thereby delegitimizing trans identities and expressions. What do I mean by that? In society, we tend to say that not being trans is normal, and being trans is abnormal. Now, on the surface, this may make sense. Population-wise, there are way fewer trans people than there are cisgender people. But what starts to become intertwined with this statistical descriptor of normal is a value judgment. When you say something is normal, like cisgender, it starts to get equated with being more desirable or better, instead of just more common. But it's not. Being cisgender isn't better or worse than being transgender. It's just different, and admittedly, more common. Yet, while trans people have become more accepted in North America within the past decade or so, this cisgenderist attitude of seeing transgender people as less desirable still leads to discrimination against trans people within society, in everything from the military to employment to housing. But there's more to life than employment and housing. Recently, researchers Dr. Karen Blair and Dr. Rhea Hoskin asked, might cisgenderism also affect who we consider to be acceptable dating partners? Their paper, Transgender Exclusion from the World of Dating, Patterns of Acceptance and Rejection of Hypothetical Trans Dating Partners as a Function of Sexual and Gender Identity, catchy title, rolls right off the tongue, examined the response patterns of cisgender and transgender individuals with varied sexual identities to examine the question of which genders they would be willing to date in a future hypothetical relationship. We even tried to send one of these studies to Ryan Gosling, all in the name of science, of course. The study was an exploration both in and out of the LGBTQ community, aiming to determine whether dating patterns were inclusive of transgender individuals and if they were extended equally to both trans men and trans women. Trans women like me, because I need love too. The majority of the 958 participants identified as cisgender women, followed by cisgender men, trans women, non-binary, and trans men. And sadly, no movie stars named Ryan. The participants indicated their self-reported sexual identities, with 24.4% indicating gay or lesbian, 63.5% indicating heterosexual or straight, and 12.2% indicated bisexual, queer, or two-spirit. Participants were asked to specify which genders they had previously dated and which genders they would consider dating in the future, selecting all that applied from the following options of cisgender man, cisgender women, trans man, trans women, or genderqueer. And Ryan Gosling. Okay, not really, because who wouldn't date him? So, what did the study discover? Well, results found that overall, 87.5% did not select a trans person as someone they would consider dating, and 12.5% responded they would consider dating a trans person. Those that indicated they would consider dating a trans person were older, more likely to have a university degree, and resided outside of Canada. They were also more likely to identify as queer, bisexual, or two-spirit. And heterosexual men and women were the least likely to indicate a willingness to date a trans person. So, 87.5% is a lot. But let's talk specifically about the 12.5% who said they would date a trans person. The researchers found that 40% of this group indicated that they were only willing to date a trans man, while 13.3% indicated that they were only willing to date a trans woman. And 46.7% indicated that they were willing to date either a trans man or a trans woman. But let's dive even further into this. When analyzing the data, researchers sorted people into three categories: congruent, incongruent, and exclusionary. What do those categories mean? Theoretically, if you're a gay man, you're interested in dating men. No surprise there. Now, because all trans men are men, a congruent gay man would be okay with dating a trans man. An incongruent gay man would want to date a trans woman. even though trans women are women, and one wouldn't inherently assume a gay man would want to date a woman. For another example, an incongruent straight woman would want to date a trans woman, but not a trans man. So, congruent participant responses quote-unquote matched their stated sexual and gender identities. Incongruent participants' responses, quote, did not match their stated sexual and gender identities, and exclusionary participants indicated no willingness to date a trans person at all. Now, just to make clear, the terms congruent and incongruent are not meant to judge someone's preference. We're not saying someone who is labeled incongruent by the study is wrong or bad. If you're a lesbian woman who wants to date trans men, that's 100% awesome. You're allowed to like who you like and identify how you feel most comfortable. The study just used these admittedly imperfect terms to try to categorize their findings. Better terms could include those suggested by Dr. Sari Van Ander's research, including branched instead of incongruent and coincident instead of congruent. But that's what follow-up studies are for, constant improvement. Now, the findings showed that there were a favoring of trans men over trans women, with 22% more people being willing to date trans men than expected, and 19.2% fewer people being willing to date trans women than expected. One of the reasons behind this was that lesbians were more likely to have overly inclusive, incongruent, or branched responses, such that they said they would date trans men, but very few said that they would date trans women. Why might this be? Well, one simple reason may be that lesbians, as part of the broader LGBTQ community, may be more likely to have already had experience dating someone who has either transitioned while they were together or who transitioned after their relationship ended. This knowledge and proximity to trans men may have led them to be inclusive of trans men when thinking about future hypothetical partners. After all, we know that contact with a specific group of people is one of the best predictors of subsequent inclusion of those people. But why not trans women? Well, for one thing, if being with a partner who transitioned is one of the key factors that increases openness to dating a trans person in the future, it's perhaps less likely that a lesbian would find herself dating a presumed man who would later transition and identify as a trans woman. Thus, that personal experience factor may be missing. Furthermore, lesbians were not unique in being unlikely to date trans women. Across all groups, trans women were excluded the most. Even among queer bisexual men, women, and non-binary individuals, there was a similar pattern. Consequently, there appears to be more going on here, and future research is necessary to better understand what makes some people open to dating trans people, especially trans women, and what makes others think that it would never be even hypothetically possible. So now that we've summarized the specifics of this study, there are a few things that we need to talk about, because this study has set off a whole bunch of controversy. Oh boy, did it. One of the main criticisms about the study was the argument that the researchers were somehow saying that if you don't want to date a trans person, you're instantly a transphobic person, or even more harshly, a transphobic bigot. The purpose of this study was not to judge someone's preference of partners. This paper is not trying to unilaterally say that if you don't want to date a trans person, or anyone else for that matter, that you're somehow a bad person for that. As I said before, you're allowed to identify how you want, like who you like, and be attracted to who you like. However, what we are saying is that the societal values that we talked about before, about how we say that being transgender is somehow less desirable or can be considered abnormal, can, just like other societal issues like sexism or racism, play a role in shaping whom we see as desirable partners, as the evidence of this admittedly preliminary and imperfect study bears out. And that's no one individual's specific fault, but it does exist. For the most part, transphobia does not mean that you hate transgender people or are somehow trying to attack them, although it certainly can. But for the most of us, we all harbor some feelings of transphobia, even within the transgender community. I know that I harbored and still harbor some transphobic feelings. That's just how I was raised, and I'm trying to learn and grow from it. The messages from society about trans people may influence how you think about them, regardless of if you're conscious of it or not. That doesn't make you a bad person, or say that you're bad for not wanting to date a trans person. What it does mean is that if you don't want to date a trans person, maybe it's worthwhile to ask yourself why you feel that way, and about where those feelings come from. I and this study's researchers believe that this is an issue that needs to be discussed openly and honestly, not ignored, because only then can we fix it. This study both instigated and became a part of a larger conversation, one that we think is necessary and hope leads to more understanding, learning, and ultimately greater acceptance of the trans community. We believe that being trans is a beautiful and positive thing, as is being cisgender for that matter. Yet sadly, we also recognize that transgender identity has been so incredibly politicized, scapegoated, and denormalized that has resulted in the very real effects that we see in studies like this one. We can't change these attitudes instantaneously, but if we do nothing, then they will never change. While we hope that the results of studies like this will change over time, that change is unlikely to happen without first acknowledging that trans people are being excluded from the world of dating, even just the hypothetical. Furthermore, we need studies like this so that we can find out how widespread these patterns of exclusion may be, and what kind of attitudes are associated with excluding trans people. Only once we have learned these things will we, as a community, be able to make progress in addressing trans exclusion. Transgender people do get excluded from dating pools, and this is an indicator of larger issues that transgender people face. It happens and we need to talk about it. I also know, on a very personal level, that seeing results like this can be scary for a lot of trans people out there. Especially young trans people, or trans people who haven't come out yet. No one wants to see that to live as your true self might mean you are somehow seen as less desirable as a partner. You and everyone deserve to have love in your life. But for any trans person out there who feels scared that they won't find someone who loves them, know that this is far, far from true. Who you are, who you truly are, from what we see on the outside to deep in your heart, is beautiful. 87.5% of people may seem like a big number, but recontextualizing that, 12.5%, the number of people willing to date trans people, is actually larger than the estimated number of people in the transgender population. A fact that was noted by one of the KLB research's kind donators, Kay Brown. Meaning that, at least as indicated by this study, there are more people willing to date trans people than there are trans people. So that's somewhat reassuring. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at the larger issues at play, and what role cisgenderism plays in the exclusion of trans people in dating pools, as well as what it could mean for those who are included as well. So, to every transgender person, it is important to know that there are always going to be people and communities out there who see your beauty and will love and care about you. I and the creators of this study are some of them. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, give this channel a subscribe. And if you want to support more LGBTQ focused research, consider giving to KLB Research's Patreon page. The link is below. And if you want to support me specifically making videos like this where I make fun of myself, consider checking out my own Just Eat Gender Patreon page or my YouTube page. See you next time. I'm gonna go watch another Ryan Gosling movie.